Having an admiral to aspire to is a key component to a happier existence. An individual whose beliefs and practices you find admirable. A mentor. If there was a patron saint for bullied schoolchildren around the world, it would be Mr. Miyagi, the lovable and sage instructor from the hit TV series Karate Kid. In the 1984 film The Karate Kid, Pat Morita teaches young viewers the importance of self-defense and the appropriate usage of karate techniques. Pat Morita's stunning revelations suggest the show's producers may be bullies, which is strange considering how wonderful the show appears. Pat Morita cast Mr. Miyagi. How were his trials a good fit for the part he played in the film? Who is the antagonist from Pat Morita's narrative? Your questions will be thoroughly addressed as we progress through the movie. Hollywood heavyweights like Leonardo DiCaprio and Jake Gyllenhaal were born in California, and Pat Morita was born there as well. The Morita children, Pat and Tamaru, were born on July 28, 1932, to parents who emigrated from Japan. His given name was Noriyuki, but he became known as Pat as he got older. Nori was his parents' shorthand for him. At the same time, Tamaru and Momoi had a son, Hideo, who was 12 years old before Pat was born. There was a lovely, close-knit family of 4 until Pat, at the tender age of 2, with spinal TB. At the Weimar Institute in California, Pat was frequently informed that he would never regain the ability to walk while he lay wrapped in blankets. San Francisco's Shriners Hospital was Pat's new home. Because he was unable to have a typical upbringing, Pat's subsequent 9 years were the worst of his life. Pat had experimental surgery at the age of 11, after waiting 9 years, and it restored his hope. He regained his ability to walk, and the physicians released him from the facility. Unfortunately, the United States Army collected up all Japanese immigrants to the interim camps when Pat was bedridden in the hospital. This was in response to the onset of World War II. After Pat's physicians gave him the all-clear, he and his family went to Arizona's Gila River camp for a while before being sent to Tuke Lake War Relocation Center. After the war, Pat Morita's life began amidst all the mayhem. After the war, Pat Morita fulfilled a childhood desire by going back to school. Because he was a senior in high school, he went to Army Joe. Pat, a young Japanese student, would frequently face prejudice and bigotry from American parents at school. Children with lovely spirits, meanwhile, paid it no mind, and considered Pat Morita to be no more than a sociable fellow student. Even though he missed his time at the hospital, he made up for it at Army Joe High. Pat Morita may have only stood 5 feet 2 inches tall, but he made it to the school basketball team because to his charisma and sense of humor. One of Pat's earliest accomplishments, thanks to his sense of humor, was joining the basketball club. The 1949 Army Joe La Mishgla yearbook showcased his first major artwork, a golden manor, on both the front and back pages, showcasing his talent as an artist as well. Noriyuki Morita was Pat's birth name, as stated above. A visiting priest would tease Pat about how he would be rechristened Patrick if he ever converted to Catholicism during his time in the hospital. It appeared that the younger Pat liked the moniker, so he continued to use it as a nickname. I suppose it's possible for some pet names to be officially recognized. Pat grew up in Sacramento, California, where his parents owned and operated a Chinese restaurant. During his free time after school, he would lend a hand. One of Pat's jobs was to help out his parents, but he had no idea that another duty involved keeping his parents customers. Most individuals would feel instantly better after Pat cracked a joke. After finishing high school in 1949, Pat got a full-time job at the family restaurant. Whether it was at the restaurant or some other venue, he was frequently engaged to preside over group dinners. Prior to the next catastrophe befalling the Japanese family, Pat's parents' business flourished. As Pat's dad, Tamaru, was making his way home from an all-night movie in 1956, he was involved in a hit and run. The automobile hit Tamaru, and he didn't make it. The Morita family felt immense pain as a result of this occurrence. The restaurant provided for Pat and his wife for a period after she became pregnant, and they were both mature men. Because he had to support his mother and expectant wife after this tragedy, Pat worked too much. Pat, although employed at the restaurant, was constantly on the lookout for a better career path that would allow him to support his expanding family. The majority of people find that they are first held accountable for their acts when they become parents. Pat's new baby forced him to work longer hours so the family could afford his needs. After working as a data processor for various state organizations for 6 years following his father's death, he eventually graduated and took a graveyard shift position at Aerojet General. Thanks to his perseverance, he was able to land a new position as department head at Lockheed, another aerospace company. He acted as a go-between for Lockheed's engineers and programmers as they planned the lunar eclipse for the missile programs Titan and Polaris. With this job, Pat and his family could live comfortably, but having a genuine love for what you do was the only way to persevere through the stress of your job. As a result of occupational exhaustion brought on by the job's increasing demands, Pat resigned and went back to doing what he loves, being a comic. It was a lot of effort for Pat to get back into comedy. It wasn't that he needed to learn the skill, it was just that back then it was unusual for comedians to become famous. In San Francisco and Sacramento, he played at tiny clubs. Pat chose to keep his nickname as his stage name when asked for one. Pat had a wild brand of humor that made him friends with other comedians even though he had a hard time making it as a comic. Pat was persuaded by the ventriloquist Hank Garcia to leave Sacramento and give Los Angeles a go. Everyone who made it big in the art world lived in Louisiana. In her role as Pat's manager, his buddy Sally Marr decided to lend a hand. Pat relocated to Los Angeles and got his start in stand-up comedy thanks to Sally's encouragement. Pat was a regular at the Santa Monica nightclubs that Sally scheduled for them. He also served as the opening act for Red Fox, Connie Stevens, and Vic Damone on additional occasions. Although Pat relished engaging in his passion, he found himself subjected to nasty remarks from unexpected quarters. He got his first film role because to his comedic skills, even though he didn't have a degree in theater art. Pat Morita started acting in various supporting roles in films like Thoroughly Modern Millie and The Shakiest Gun in the West before he appeared in Karate Kid. For Pat Morita, these films marked her first taste of stardom. Pat was a guest comedian on Rowan and Martin's Laugh in the 60s. His commitment and joy in making people laugh were the highlights of Pat's career. He continued to receive better jobs and more limelight time because to this character. Pat played Lalita in the 1970s sitcoms Ah Chew and Midway. Happy Days, which aired in 1975, starred Pat Morita as Matsu Arnold Takahashi. He became beloved by America's senior citizens for his portrayal of Pat Morita on Happy Days. Arnold, the character, was once just a supporting player. In the film, he maintained a restaurant that doubled as a karate dojo after school. Arnold figured out how to be the main character in Happy Days' 11th season. The comedic relief provided by Happy Days was well known. While some saw humor, others saw potential, and the 1986 Karate Kid film cast Pat Morita as Mr. Miyagi. The first group of American films to include a leading actor who was both American and Japanese were Tina and O'Hara, and Pat went on to launch his own television series called Mr. T. Pat Morita departed from urban areas and relocated to Hawaii in the early 1980s. While on the island, he got back into writing sales copy for local businesses and performed stand-up comedy at nightclubs. He made the decision to let his hair and beards grow out while he was in Hawaii. Because Pat was game to try something new, the hair growth was done. He had no idea the hair would turn out to be a boon soon. John Avildsen, meanwhile, had just wrapped up a successful assignment on the Rocky film back in Los Angeles. Columbia Pictures took it upon themselves to produce another box office smash under his direction. Robert Mark Kamen was entrusted with the script tasks. It was Kamen's personal mission to pen an absolutely astounding screenplay. After the directors gave their blessing, casting calls could begin. Inspiration for the script originated from a Hawaiian story about a little girl who was 8 years old. He was persuaded that Pat Morita could play the principal role similar to Mr. Miyagi do of the relationship with Hawaii. Daniel LaRusso, the protagonist of The Karate Kid, is a teenage boy from New Jersey who has just relocated to Los Angeles. When he arrived in Los Angeles, he encountered bullies who were skilled in karate and other martial arts. He had a meeting with Mr. Miyagi while training, and Miyagi told him that the mind and heart, not the hands, are the keys to karate. In a karate tournament, Daniel LaRusso could stand up to the bullies and defend himself. The script was so well written that John Avildsen thought Pat Morita would be a suitable fit for the part. James Weintraub, the producer, was totally opposed to the idea, though. According to him, the actor cast as Mr. Miyagi had to exude an air of seriousness, not exactly a stand-up comic like Pat Morita. He refused to budge from his position that a comedian was not suitable for the part. Pat Morita completed his first order of business upon hearing about the back and forth during his visit to Los Angeles. His manager contacted him on his way back to Hawaii and urged him to try out for the part. Although James Weintraub was impressed by Pat Morita's acting ability, he was not sure that Morita could not perform the role. Morita auditioned nevertheless. John Avildsen would not budge from his insistence on listening to each and every one of the original auditionees, even after multiple failed attempts to cast the part. Following his manager's advice, Pat gave it another go, and this time, John Avildsen was impressed. While John was in his office after the trial, James Weintraub came across some images of Pat's Morita with long hair and beards. James knew he had discovered Mr. Miyagi right there. In subsequent casting calls, Pat was asked to reprise her role as Daniel LaRusso 5 times. James Weintraub personally informed Pat Morita of the good news during the 5th practice. Both the Golden Globe and an Academic Award for Best Supporting Actor went to Pat Morita for his performance in the first Karate Kid. 2 additional Karate Kid films were produced by the same studio after the original film's success, serving as a sequel to the film. Once again, Pat Morita was remarkable. At the 57th awards presentation, he was subsequently acknowledged as Noriyuki Pat Morita. After his breakout role as Pat Morita in Karate Kid, he went on to star in a string of critically acclaimed films. Mr. T and Tina, a 1976 television series in which he played Taro Takahashi, is one of his works. The series was canceled in the autumn of that year due to underwhelming ratings, despite being the first American sitcom on network television. It was O'Hara, a detective show on ABC, also featured Pat Morita. Due to low ratings, the show was canceled after 2 seasons. Hi Amos. Despite the seeming failure of his shows, Pat went on to star as Tommy Tanaka opposite Kirk Douglas in the film Amos. For his performance in this film, he was nominated for 2 Golden Globes and received his first Primetime Emmy Award. Japan welcomes Big Bird. The 1998 Japanese animated film Big Bird featured Pat Morita's voice as the narrator, a bamboo princess. The romantic drama Captive Hearts took place during WWII. Canadian, American, and Japanese producers Pat Morita and John A. Curry worked on the picture. It was written by both men. The 1987 film Fukushima, the main character, was portrayed by Pat later on. In 1994, Pat Morita made an appearance in Season 5 of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, The Great Conquest, a tale of love across 3 realms. Pat Morita's second language was English, despite popular belief that she spoke Japanese first. Being born in California was a major plus for him. The English language adaptation of The Great Conquest featured him as the narrator due to his command of the language. Produced by Nickelodeon at the same time as Space Cases, The Mystery Files of Shelby Wood was an early example of a co-production. Nickelodeon used to produce a single flagship series per year. Thankfully, Pat Morita and the rest of the ensemble made The Mystery Files of Shelby Wood a smashing success. In the short film Talk to Taka, Pat Morita played the role of a sushi chef. His role as a leading guy in the show left an indelible impression on viewers. Mulan. Pat Morita's voice was essential to the success of every Disney film, including the renowned Mulan. In the 1998 original Mulan film, he provided the voice for the Chinese emperor. It seemed predictable that Pat Morita would reprise her role in a sequel. He provided the voice for the Chinese emperor in the 2004 film Mulan 2. Guest appearances on shows were common for Pat Morita due to his reputation. Among these films are the 1996 film Married with Children and the 2000 film The Huleys. He had an appearance on Spy TV in 2002. In 2003, he had an appearance on the Yes Dear sitcom. Even though Night Patrol was critically panned in 1984, Pat reprised her role as the rape victim in that film. Pat Morita's impact on children's products was fulfilling, as screen time is adored by children worldwide. In the commercial for Colgate, he played the role of Mr. Miyagi. He was just supposed to sing the praises of Colgate toothpaste as the best option. He also appeared in a Nissan ad that ran in Japan in 1996. The real life of Pat Morita was far from glamorous. Through his 3 marriages, he fought alcoholism on a regular basis. Evelyn Guerrero, his last wife, was Morita's childhood friend from the time she was 15 years old. They reconciled and were married until Pat passed away, which was many years later. Guerrero was one of 3 spouses that witnessed Pat Morita's tragic last years. Together, they worked on his final piece, The Story of Pat Morita and More Miyagi. More Than Miyagi, The Story of Pat Morita, was completed with Guerrero's assistance. Nevertheless, that was not the only documentary dedicated to Pat Morita. In loving remembrance of him, Kevin Derrick wrote Long Story Short. In spite of his best efforts, Pat's drinking was eating away at his brain and organs. On November 24, 2005, Pat Morita passed away at the age of 73. There were several conflicting accounts regarding Pat's cause of death when he died away. Although Ali Morita, Pat's daughter, initially said her father had a heart attack, subsequent tests revealed that he actually died of kidney failure due to a gallbladder and urinary tract infection. He was cremated at Palm Green Valley Mortuary after passing away in his Los Angeles home. It all started with Pat's repeated refusal to act in The Karate Kid. Defying the producer's attempts to make fun of him for his profession as a comic, Pat demonstrated that he could excel in any role life threw his way. In 2018, 13 years after Pat Morita's death, a direct sequel to Karate Kid began broadcasting. Cobra Kai paid honor to the late Pat, who helped make The Karate Kid a hit by making references to Mr. Miyagi. Pat's legacy lived on through his achievements in film, even after he passed away. In the year following his death, his voice was used in numerous tributes, including the Karate Island episode of SpongeBob's 4th season. Also released in 2006 as an independent picture, Only the Brave featured him. It was said that Pat Morita had a way with people. Everyone that had the pleasure of working with him in a production had nothing but praise for him. Following his passing, even his fellow Army Joe High School students paid tribute, recalling how he was just another great classmate.